The alien warrior closed her eyes, certain that death had already claimed her. Every fiber of her being screamed for it. Her species, the Zirith, were born to conquer, bred for war, and trained to obliterate anything weaker than themselves. Death in combat was not a failure, it was a matter of honor. Yet, lying among the twisted wreckage of her flagship, with flames licking the hull and the stench of scorched metal filling the air, she felt something she had never expected: bewilderment. All around her, the battlefield had gone silent, save for the occasional crackle of dying circuits. Her comrades, elite warriors, honed for centuries in the art of destruction, were either vaporized or dismembered, their screams cut short by the human weapons she had once dismissed as primitive. The humans were supposed to be fragile, laughably fragile, and yet they had survived in ways the Zirith had never anticipated. She tried to push herself up, but her claws slipped on the slick metal floor. Pain lanced through her abdomen, and her vision blurred. She opened her eyes again, expecting to see the familiar sight of humans closing in with blasters and plasma rifles, ready to finish what had begun. Instead, she saw a man. A human. Standing calmly in the middle of the wreckage, moving with the confidence of someone in a kitchen rather than on a battlefield. He was cooking. The Zirith warrior froze, the concept of cooking, basic, mundane, utterly human, clashing violently with everything her species had known about war. Flames licked the edges of a small pan, sizzling meat releasing an aroma so intoxicatingly ordinary that it made her stomach tighten in confusion. He hummed softly, stirring ingredients with a practiced motion, as if he had done this 1,000 times before, entirely unconcerned with the carnage surrounding him. You are alive!" she rasped, her voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. Her tongue, thick with fatigue, struggled to form coherent words. The human glanced at her, eyes calm, almost amused. "Yes," he said casually, flipping a piece of meat with precision. "Alive. I always assumed you would die first. That seems to be the tradition in these encounters, isn't it? Aliens attack, humans survive. Predictable." Her instincts screamed at her to attack, to shred him where he stood, but something in his calmness froze her. It was a challenge she had never faced, a human who did not fear, did not panic, and did not obey the scripts the Zirith had catalogued for centuries. You should be dead," she whispered, claws flexing involuntarily. The human smiled faintly, as if her astonishment was a private joke. "I could be," he said. "But death is overrated. And besides, there are better ways to win a war than by killing the first enemy that looks at you funny." Her mind reeled. The Zirith prided themselves on efficiency in combat, on overwhelming force and terror. Humans were supposed to crumble in predictable ways, yet here he was, entirely unfazed by a battlefield that had killed dozens of his species in moments. Cooking dinner. Laughing at the absurdity of the universe in the midst of war. A hiss escaped her throat, a warning, a prelude to violence. But he ignored it entirely, stirring his pan and humming a soft, eerily familiar tune. "Relax," he said. "I'm not here to kill you. Not yet. We'll get to that later, if necessary. Right now, I need to finish dinner. War can wait. Hunger cannot." Her claws twitched, half in reflex, half in confusion. Every instinct screamed at her to attack, but another part, an alien curiosity she had never allowed herself, kept her rooted in place. She watched as he chopped vegetables with surgical precision, sprinkled seasoning over meat, and plated the food like an artist. This is impossible," she muttered. Her species had evolved to survive the harshest environments, to conquer, and to thrive in combat. But humans were different. They did not fight by instinct alone. They fought with ingenuity, audacity, and an absurdity that no Zirith tactical manual could predict. He finally looked at her fully, meeting her gaze with an expression of faint amusement. "Do you see it now?" he asked. "The thing your species can't understand? Humans don't just survive. We dominate. We turn ordinary moments into weapons. We weaponize absurdity." She hissed, claws scraping the floor. "You mock me." "Mock?" he said, shaking his head with a grin. "No. I'm teaching you a lesson. You've studied us, catalogued our behavior, and assumed predictability. You assumed fragility. You assumed obedience. You assumed we were just prey. He gestured to the sizzling pan. And here I am. Cooking. Alive. Mocking your assumptions while eating dinner. You see the difference? Her mind swirled with confusion and disbelief. Rage flared in her chest. How could this fragile creature, this human, defy every expectation she had ever had about war? He had no armor, no enhanced claws, no psychic implants. Yet he was more dangerous than any Zirith warship, more lethal than any squad of elite warriors. He fought not with brute strength, but with creativity, audacity, and calm confidence. Then she realized what she had been overlooking all along. Humans did not fight the way the Zirith expected. They did not rely solely on fear, aggression, or raw power. They adapted, improvised, and used every ordinary element of life as a tool or weapon. Cooking dinner in the midst of a battlefield? That was not madness. That was strategy. That was psychological warfare, and she was already losing. The human set a plate in front of her, smoke curling up from the food. Eat, he said, his tone casual, almost conversational, as if offering a meal to a guest rather than confronting an enemy warrior. You'll understand soon enough. She stared at it. The idea of consuming something, the simple act of eating, felt alien in the middle of slaughter. Yet the aroma, the warmth, the humanness of it drew her in. Against every survival instinct, she lifted the fork. She took a bite. It was extraordinary. Warm, nourishing, utterly human. She had anticipated poison, traps, or some cruel trick, but instead, she tasted life. And in that simple act, a revelation struck her with the force of a plasma blast. Humans were unpredictable, terrifyingly clever, and capable of making war into an art that no Zirith warrior could hope to understand. The human leaned back, sipping from a glass, and watched her. You're thinking, he said. I see it. That look in your eyes, confusion, fear, the creeping realization that we're not what you thought we were. That's the first step. Understanding. The next step, well, we'll see. The Zirith warrior's claws twitched, her body ready to strike, but her mind raced, caught between rage and awe. Every shred of pride in her species demanded she attack, yet every fiber of logic whispered that attacking would be foolish, dangerous, and perhaps, in some strange, incomprehensible way, admirable. For the first time in her life, she understood the true horror of humanity, their unpredictability, their audacity, their terrifying genius. They did not just survive, they thrived in ways no alien race could anticipate, and they did it with a casualness that defied reason. She closed her eyes, tasting the human-cooked meal, and realized something profound. She had underestimated them. Every calculation, every expectation, every prediction she had relied on was wrong. And that, more than any weapon, more than any fleet, more than any genetic enhancement, was what made humans dangerous. She opened her eyes again. He was still there, smiling faintly, calm, unthreatened, utterly human. And in that instant, she understood, war had changed. The battlefield was no longer measured in firepower or armor. It was measured in creativity, audacity, and sheer, terrifying human will. And humanity had just served its first course. The Zirith warriors sat frozen, claws hovering above the plate as if striking it could somehow break the spell. She had expected humans to panic, to flee, to beg for mercy, or to attack. But the man before her, the human, had done none of these things. He had survived against impossible odds, and now, in the aftermath of destruction that would have left lesser species cowering, he was cooking. She had never seen such behavior, nor could she have imagined it. Every fiber of her training screamed at her that war was chaos, that it was blood and fire and noise. And yet here he was, orchestrating order amidst ruin. Flames danced under his pan like they were part of a ritual, not a weapon. Steam curled from the food, carrying with it a scent so alien to her senses that it felt like a message from another dimension. Why? she rasped, voice thick with both disbelief and exhaustion. Why aren't you attacking? Why, are you cooking? He glanced at her over the rim of the pan, his eyes calm, piercing. Attack? He said, voice casual, as if discussing the weather. Why waste effort? You're predictable. You've been predictable since the first moment your species touched this planet. You fight with brute strength, intimidation, and terror. All of it, boring. I prefer subtlety. I prefer strategy. The words made her pause. Strategy? Humans, she had thought, fought with instinct, with improvisation, but this was different. He wasn't improvising. He was orchestrating, calculating, bending chaos into a shape he could control. She wanted to strike him down, wanted to crush this fragile creature who had survived her species' most elite units. But every time she moved, he continued undisturbed, plating vegetables with precision, seasoning meat like a master of some ancient art. You underestimate us, he said. You always do. You think because we're fragile, because we don't have claws like yours or exoskeletons like your soldiers, we are weak. But weakness is an illusion. Humans survive because we think. We anticipate. We turn the mundane into a weapon, the ordinary into a trap, the everyday into strategy. You call this absurdity. We call it advantage. Her claws twitched, itching to strike, but she stayed rooted, bewildered. She had been trained to recognize danger instantly, to calculate threats with unmatched precision. And yet this human was not a threat in the way her species understood threats. He was dangerous because she could not measure him, could not predict his next move. You're insane, she hissed. This is not a battlefield. This is chaos. You cannot. He laughed softly, a sound both human and mocking. Exactly. Chaos is our ally. We don't need to fight the way you do, tearing through ranks with sheer force. We fight with creativity, with audacity, with confidence that borders on madness. And because of that, we survive. And we dominate. Her mind raced. The humans she had fought before were dangerous because of their stubbornness and numbers, but this one, he had survived with nothing but ingenuity. Nothing but calm audacity. He had no shields, no enhanced claws, no weapons that could compare to the Ziritha's technology. And yet he stood here, entirely unfazed, cooking as if he were in a home kitchen rather than in the heart of a battlefield. You mock me, she spat, her voice rising. Rage burned in her chest, a sensation she hadn't felt in a long time. You dare mock a Zirith warrior? Mock? He said, tilting his head. No. I teach. I demonstrate. You've studied us, catalogued our behavior, assumed we're predictable, assumed fragility, assumed obedience. And yet here I am, doing what no Zirith could anticipate, doing something utterly mundane, utterly human, and yet utterly dominant. You see? This is war. And humans, we redefine it. Her vision blurred with disbelief. The battlefield was silent except for the hiss of cooking and the occasional distant explosion. Other humans moved in the shadows, turning debris into traps, converting vehicles into weapons, improvising artillery from scavenged materials. Every move was unpredictable, ingenious, and terrifying in its simplicity. Her instincts screamed at her to act, to kill him before he could consolidate whatever madness he was orchestrating. But her mind, for the first time, hesitated. She realized she had been trained to fight predictable opponents. She had been bred to annihilate enemies that followed patterns. But humans were chaos incarnate. He finally set the pan down and gestured toward the plate in front of her. Eat, he said. Taste it. Understand it. This is not just food. This is a lesson. The Zirith warrior stared at the plate. She had anticipated poison, a trap, some cruel trick. But the scent, the warmth, the humanness of it, disarmed her in a way no weapon could. Her pride raged against the absurdity of eating from the hands of the species she had come to destroy. And yet, the aroma called to her instincts, promising life and survival where death had seemed inevitable. Her claws trembled as she picked up the fork. She ate. Warm, nourishing, ordinary. And extraordinary. With every bite, a revelation burned through her. Humans did not merely survive, they twisted the universe to their will, turning ordinary acts into instruments of power. Cooking dinner in a battlefield? That was audacity. That was dominance. That was war in a way the Zirith could never understand. The human watched her carefully. I see it, he said. That look in your eyes. Confusion. Fear. Respect. Understanding. That is the first step. The next steps, well, you'll see. Humans do not follow rules. We invent them. And we break them at our leisure. She wanted to attack. She wanted to tear him apart with her claws and prove the superiority of her species. But every instinct whispered caution. She realized that his danger was not in his strength, nor in weapons, nor even in numbers. It was in his mind. His audacity. His calm mastery of chaos. She swallowed, tasting the warmth of his meal, and understood. The humans had survived not by brute force but by brilliance. Not by conformity but by chaos. They had weaponized life itself, turning everyday acts into psychological artillery, using culture, humor, and ingenuity as shields and swords. And she, a Zirith warrior bred for centuries to conquer, had been utterly unprepared. The human leaned back, sipping from a glass, watching her with quiet amusement. Humans, he said, almost conversationally, we do not fight the way you expect. We do not die the way you expect. And we certainly do not surrender the way you expect. You've been fighting your entire life with rules that no longer apply. Her claws flexed, her body tense, but she remained seated, caught in the web of his words, his calm, and the terrifying brilliance of the species she had underestimated. The battlefield stretched around them, smoke and fire painting the ruins in shades of chaos and ruin. She realized, with a mixture of awe and dread, that this human, this singular, fragile human, represented the very essence of what made humanity so terrifying. Not strength. Not numbers. Not technology. It was their unpredictability. Their audacity. Their capacity to take the mundane and turn it into a weapon. And in that realization, she understood something more profound. She had been defeated before she had even struck. For the first time, the Zirith warrior understood the true horror of facing humanity. They did not just survive. They redefined survival. They turned war into art. And every ordinary, absurd, human act became a weapon, a strategy, and a statement all at once. And here she was, alive, confused, trapped, and yet inexplicably grateful. Because she had tasted it. And she would never forget. Humans had served their first lesson. And it was terrifying. The Zirith warrior had survived. She couldn't quite believe it, but here she was, alive, and more bewildered than ever. In the days following that surreal encounter, she followed the human across the battlefield, not out of obedience, nor loyalty, but because she couldn't stop herself. Curiosity, something foreign to her species, burned hotter than rage. She had to understand how a single human could bend the chaos of war to his will, turn destruction into theater, and yet survive unscathed. Everywhere they went, the humans were rewriting the rules of combat. Cities, once familiar and orderly, had become twisted mazes of lethal improvisation. Streetlights became snipers' perches, overturned vehicles were transformed into mobile barricades and artillery platforms. Rubble was stitched together with metal and cables to create traps more intricate than anything the Zirith had ever devised. And through it all, the humans moved with an uncanny grace, as if the chaos were a dance, and they were leading. She tried to fight back. She tried the techniques that had worked against lesser humans, against predictable units. She stalked, she struck, she ambushed, but every time, her attacks were anticipated, diverted, or turned into an opportunity for the humans. One man, with nothing but a wrench and a coil of wire, turned her own momentum against her, leaving her sprawled across the street, while he calmly flipped pancakes on a makeshift stove in the middle of the battlefield. She hissed, claws flexing, mind racing. Every instinct screamed at her to kill him, to annihilate the humans and reclaim what she had lost. But she couldn't. Not yet. Because every time she struck, every time she planned, every time she assumed dominance, the humans reshaped the battlefield beneath her, adapting, improvising, and mocking her assumptions with casual audacity. Why are you doing this? She demanded one evening, cornering him in the wreckage of a partially destroyed apartment complex. They were alone for a moment, and she could see the faint glow of fire reflecting in his eyes. Why do you fight like this? Why do you survive when your species should have died? Why are you laughing? He leaned against a broken wall, casually peeling an orange, juice dribbling down his fingers. Laughing? He asked, a grin spreading across his face. Oh, you mean like you'd expect someone to cowering in fear? No. Not laughing. Smiling. Calm. Observing. Learning. Humans laugh at chaos because we understand it. We bend it. We turn it into a weapon. She narrowed her eyes. You speak in riddles. You are insane. Your species is fragile. You should be dead. You should fear me. You should. He interrupted her with a calm, almost patronizing shake of the head. No. That's exactly the problem with your species. You define danger the way you've always known it: strength, claws, weapons. But humans, we define it differently. Creativity, unpredictability, audacity. And sometimes, the simplest things, the mundane, the ordinary, are our deadliest tools. Today, it's pancakes. Tomorrow, it might be a traffic light. The day after, a coffee machine. We don't fight like you expect, and that's why we survive. The Zirith warrior's mind twisted in frustration. She had been bred for war, trained to think in terms of absolute dominance, honed to strike first, strike fast, strike lethal. And yet she had no answer. Every move she made was countered, every strategy anticipated, every assumption exploited. And through it all, he remained calm. Smiling. Cooking. Observing. Leading. You underestimate us, he said. You always do. And that will be your species' downfall. You expect rules, structure, predictability. We invent chaos. We weaponize absurdity. And we survive. A distant explosion shook the street, and she instinctively leapt for cover, but the human didn't flinch. He calmly pulled out a small device, pressed a button, and a pulse radiated outward. Drones exploded mid-air, twisting and sparking as they crashed to the ground. No effort. No struggle. Just control. She stared, momentarily stunned. This human, alone, had neutralized a squad of elite Zirith drones without breaking a sweat. She had trained for decades to anticipate threats like these. He had done it with a flick of a wrist, a calm smile, and a pan of cooking food nearby. You see? He said, tossing the device aside and flipping a slice of bread. We don't need brute force. Brute force is predictable. Brute force is boring. Humans, we think. And thinking is the deadliest weapon there is. Her rage flared anew, sharper than before. Her species had always believed they were the apex. Strength, discipline, ferocity, the Zirith were engineered to dominate. But humans were something else entirely. They didn't merely fight. They dismantled the battlefield, turned it into a game, and played by rules the Zirith couldn't comprehend. And she, a warrior bred for perfection, had no answer. Over the next days she followed him, caught in a mix of fear, fascination, and grudging respect. Humans transformed the ordinary into instruments of war. A grocery cart became a battering ram, a broken billboard, a catapult, a fire hydrant, a flamethrower. Every movement was a lesson in chaos made elegant, violence made inventive, survival made art. She tried to strike again. She tried to overwhelm him with aggression. But each attempt was met with calm observation, clever traps, and strategic nonchalance. She realized something terrifying. Humans had mastered warfare not through genetics, technology, or brute force, but through imagination. Every encounter left her more unsettled, more aware of her species' blind arrogance. One night, after a particularly grueling skirmish, she finally confronted him directly. They sat across from each other atop the ruins of a collapsed building, smoke curling from distant fires. Why do you survive like this?" she demanded. "Why do you fight differently? You should be afraid. You should be dead. You have no armor, no weapons." He interrupted her with a casual shrug, pulling a small tin of food from his pack. "Armor? Weapons? Those are trivial. Humans survive because we think, adapt, and embrace chaos. Fear is cheap. Control, now, that's what matters. And control is terrifying because you never see it coming. You think you've won? We're still here, still cooking, still planning. Still humaning." She froze, the term alien in her mouth but resonating with truth. For the first time in her life, she understood. Humans didn't just fight battles, they rewrote them. They didn't merely survive, they thrived on unpredictability. And every ordinary act, every mundane choice, became a weapon when wielded with audacity and genius. The human leaned back, watching her, calm as if they were sharing a meal in a peaceful home rather than surviving a battlefield. "You're thinking," he said. "That look in your eyes, fear, disbelief, respect. That's the first step toward understanding us. The next steps, well, that's the real lesson." Her claws flexed, body tense, heart pounding. She had trained her whole life to dominate, to control, to kill without hesitation. But humans had shattered every expectation. They had redefined war. They had weaponized chaos. They had turned ordinary, banal acts into strategy. And she had no answer. For the first time, she realized the truth: she could not defeat them through strength alone. She could not anticipate them through tactics alone. She had been trained to conquer, and yet here she was, following a species that had made mastery of unpredictability their ultimate weapon. And in that moment, fear mixed with awe, rage with respect, confusion with grudging admiration. Humans were not just survivors. They were artists of war. They were masters of chaos. And they had claimed the battlefield without firing a single, predictable shot. The Zirith warrior, for the first time, felt something she had never felt before: humility. And it was terrifying. The ruins stretched endlessly before them, a shattered cityscape of twisted steel, scorched concrete, and smoke curling like serpents into the night sky. The Zirith warrior crouched atop a collapsed overpass, every muscle coiled and ready, claws scraping the rubble beneath her. She had survived this long by following him, studying him, and, against every instinct of her species, admiring him. The human moved calmly, almost leisurely, through the battlefield. In one hand, he carried a small cooler, in the other, a pan. Around him, chaos unfolded like a carefully orchestrated performance. Human engineers had turned ruined buildings into traps, rigged derelict vehicles into automated artillery, and scattered incendiaries that flared in unpredictable patterns. And yet he moved like a conductor in a symphony of destruction, unharmed, unhurried, utterly in control. The Zirith warrior's rage boiled over. "Enough!" she roared, leaping from her perch, claws outstretched, intent on finishing what her pride demanded. "This ends tonight!" He barely flinched. With the calm of someone flipping eggs at dawn, he pressed a small button on a handheld device. The ground beneath her erupted. She fell into a pit she hadn't noticed forming, nets snapping taut with reinforced polymers stronger than Zirith steel. She struck against it, claws tearing at the fibers, but it held. She was trapped. The human approached slowly, setting his pan atop a makeshift table amidst the ruins. He unpacked a bottle of wine, pouring 2 glasses with casual elegance. Smoke from distant fires and the scent of roasted vegetables mingled in the air, incongruously domestic in a landscape of war. "You really want to do this?" he asked, voice calm, almost conversational. "Because if you do, well, let's just say the odds aren't in your favor," she hissed, flexing her claws, twisting her body against the trap. Every instinct screamed at her to tear him apart, to fight her way out. But she couldn't. Every attack she had launched since encountering humans had been countered, redirected, or rendered meaningless. She had realized too late that humans didn't fight the way her species expected. They didn't rely on strength or weapons alone, they weaponized audacity, creativity, and absurdity. Why are you doing this? She spat, frustration mingling with disbelief. You should be afraid. You should be dead. You're cooking. He smiled faintly. Cooking, he said, flipping a piece of bread, is strategy. And right now you're the lesson. He gestured to the table. Sit. Eat. You'll understand in time. For a moment she hesitated. Pride screamed at her to resist, to reject such humiliation. And yet, the aroma, the warmth, the utterly human audacity drew her in. Against every instinct, she sat, claws scraping the edge of the table, and took the plate he offered. She ate. Slowly. Carefully. Each bite was a revelation. Humans had survived centuries not through brute force but through ingenuity, through turning ordinary life into extraordinary tools of survival. Cooking dinner in the aftermath of annihilation? That was not madness, it was dominance. It was audacity. It was a statement the Zirith could not comprehend. See? He said, observing her closely. We don't need brute strength. Brute force is predictable. Humans, we think. We adapt. We laugh in the face of impossible odds. And sometimes we just serve dinner while our enemies despair. Her claws twitched, her pride wounded beyond measure, but understanding gnawed at her. She had underestimated them. Every calculation, every prediction, every plan she had relied upon for centuries was irrelevant here. Humans did not obey patterns, they created chaos and harnessed it, turning absurdity into a weapon more lethal than any Zirith warship. Then came the final demonstration. The human pressed another button on a device hidden beneath the table. A network of drones and automated traps sprang to life across the battlefield. They moved with terrifying precision, each one anticipating her instincts, countering every predictable move she could make. Her own fleet, already decimated, had been further neutralized by these seemingly improvised devices. She roared in frustration and fury, leaping and clawing with every ounce of strength she had left. But each strike was anticipated, each movement predicted, each effort rendered futile. The battlefield itself had become a weapon against her, orchestrated by a species she had dismissed as fragile. You see it now, he said, voice calm, almost serene. We redefine war. We don't just survive, we dominate. You rely on power and aggression. We rely on ingenuity, audacity, and the courage to laugh at the impossible. She snarled, trying to speak, but words failed. Every instinct screamed at her to attack, yet the truth was undeniable. Humans were not just survivors, they were artists of war, masters of chaos, and they had claimed the battlefield without firing a single predictable shot. And then, with a flourish that was almost comical in its simplicity, he flipped a pancake onto the plate beside her, as if the day's destruction had been merely a prelude to breakfast. For the first time, she laughed, low, guttural, a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration. The human smiled, raising his glass. To dinner, he said. To survival. And to the one species that will never, ever play fair. She realized in that moment that she had been bested not by strength or technology, but by ingenuity, audacity, and sheer, terrifying humanity. The Zirith had prided themselves on perfection in combat, on discipline and brute force, yet here they were, watching a species they had considered weak dominate a battlefield with nothing but creativity, unpredictability, and irreverent brilliance. Her claws relaxed, her body slumping in exhaustion. And somewhere deep inside, a seed of respect, dangerous, alien, and unwelcome, took root. She had been humiliated, defeated, and yet she understood the profound truth: humans were not merely survivors. They were masters of the impossible, and they wielded that mastery with terrifying grace. She looked at the human, cooking as if nothing had happened, and felt something she had never felt before: admiration mingled with fear, respect mingled with awe. Her species had underestimated them. And that underestimation would cost the Zirith more than she could ever imagine. The battlefield stretched endlessly around them, a testament to destruction and chaos, yet within it, humans moved calmly, confidently, and with deadly creativity. They had turned ordinary life into extraordinary instruments of survival and dominance. And in doing so, they had redefined what it meant to fight, to survive, and to conquer. The Zirith warrior closed her eyes, not to die this time, but to plan. When she opened them again, she would face the humans with the knowledge that strength alone could not win a war against them. She had witnessed the future of combat, and it belonged to those who dared to be unpredictable, audacious, and terrifyingly human. And when she opened her eyes, he was flipping another pancake, humming softly, entirely calm, utterly human. Her species would never understand. And humanity? Humanity would never stop.